Hello Fezwearers, I'm going to be showing you every classic Doctor's TARDIS available in Gmod in chronological order. I'm making this video to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the core TARDIS add-on, so I'm not going to showcase every TARDIS in depth as that would take ages, so let's get started. Here we have the Ruth Doctor's TARDIS, and I know this technically isn't a classic Doctor, but I love this TARDIS so much I had to talk about it. It has three main versions, the blue one, the green one, and the purple one. The blue and the green ones have been seen in show, but as far as I'm aware, the purple one is completely fan-made, with slight differences in the interior. There's also several other settings in the spawn menu. They let you change around some features seen in, for example, the blue version but not in the green version, like the door frame. As you can see here, it has a door frame, but in the green one there's no door frame. You can do this in the spawn menu, or you can do it in the actual TARDIS using the maintenance area, where if you press green design in the blue TARDIS, it will turn it into the green interior, and vice versa. There's also a bunch of skins on the console you can access, which reference different skins on different consoles in different interiors. God, that's a mouthful. There's also this massive scanner which shows a live view of the outside from the door's perspective. On top of that, there's a secret set room with a director's chair and a fire exit. And many add-ons have this, but none really go into this level of detail, apart from the Twice Upon a Time TARDIS, which I'll talk about in a second. But I won't really mention things like this anymore, because basically every TARDIS has them. Another cool thing this TARDIS has is automatic doors, which are on by default, which means that when you go towards the door, it will just open for you. And when you get far enough, they'll just close. This is the Twice Upon a Time TARDIS, otherwise known as David Bradley's first Doctor's TARDIS. This is very similar to the Ruth Doctor's TARDIS, as it has the same exterior, which you can probably tell, but it also has the automatic doors, a set surrounding the main console area, hidden with a secret door, the console skins, and many more. It also has multiple roof settings in the spawn menu, as well as the automatic doors to be on or off by default, and obviously double doors and classic doors. And also there's a secret skin that shows an interesting image on whatever the hell this thing is. But overall, this is one of the most realistic add-ons in Gmod, at least in my opinion. And it has lots of references to episodes, like a little cabinet hidden in this roundel. And if I press this button, it will add Brandy to it from the Twice Upon a Time episode. Now on to the proper classic Doctor TARDISes. This is the 1963 TARDIS, and it's the only Hartnell TARDIS available in Gmod. As you can see, there's some alternate versions, but I'll talk about that in a second, because if you look here, there's two new exteriors. These exteriors aren't actually in this add-on, they're from another add-on, but they are really cool and reference a famous Lost 60s episode and a film about William Hartnell's Doctor Who life. I've done a separate review of this TARDIS, so I'll do this one quickly. It has a 1963 and a 1965 interior, with a white and a green version for both. There's also a bright version that can be enabled to both these interiors, which adds some more blue and things. There's also some small settings you can change around in, well, the settings, but in a very simplified way, that's the entire add-on. These are the 1966 and 1967 TARDISes. Both of these have the CO and miniature exteriors, which are very different. The CO one is similar to the future classic TARDISes, with a flat roof and overall smaller dimensions, and the miniature one is similar to the first Doctor's exterior, and it looks a lot more like the Metropolitan Police boxes. There's also two main options, the ceiling and the plinth. The plinth puts the TARDIS exterior on wheels, and also the console and this back wall, and you can also toggle the ceiling on and off to show a set. These two interiors are very similar, but show how the TARDIS developed during the second Doctor's era, and to be honest, I prefer the 1967 version. It just feels a lot bigger and more TARDIS-y. These are the 1971, 1972, and 1973 TARDISes. The 1971 TARDIS is pretty basic. It has a small little corridor leading into the actual TARDIS in the double doors version, and just a normal entrance in the classic doors version. And it has a small little screen by the door, which I've only just noticed. The exterior on this one is pretty bland, but relates well to the show, and also has a few bugs here and there. I can only describe the interior as if the second Doctor's TARDIS and the later third Doctor's TARDIS had a baby, and then it was hit by a bus. Speaking of that, this is the 1972 TARDIS. The console is full to the brim with control after control, and they all have an animation. There's the iconic bowl roundels, and this one over here is actually a screen, which is quite cool. Also, there's this cool feature where when you lift this up, you can't take off or anything, and there's this little contraption underneath the console. Both of these are referencing the Three Doctors serial. There's also a computer exterior, or at least a computer from the 70s, which is what the doors back here were for, and I believe this exterior was used by the Master at some point, which would explain why there's a Master rotor option, where it changes the rotor and it looks quite a lot different, and that would explain why these are put in the custom versions section, as these are from the chameleon circuit but are master exteriors seen during this era. The 1973 TARDIS is very similar to the 1972 one, it's just a lot bigger. It still has the master rotor, but you can actually toggle on and off the bolt roundel, but this one increases the size of the console room and even adds a hallway with multiple rooms and references inside of it. I've got 5 TARDISes I want to show you for the Tom Baker era: the 1975 TARDIS, the 1976 TARDIS, the secondary console TARDIS, the 1997 TARDIS, and the 1981 TARDIS, which only came out a few weeks ago, so it's very new. The 1975 TARDIS has 2 exteriors, the default one and this intro box one. The intro one, as you would see in the name, is the one from the classic Tom Baker intro. This is one of the most recognisable interiors of all time, so I'm glad it's been made well. And on top of that, they've made this gradient in the roundels really well, and this little doorway would lead to a hallway, which would eventually go to the secondary control room. Speaking of that, the 1976 and secondary console TARDISes are both based on the set from Series 14, which is commonly known as the secondary control room. It's a full wooden room including a wooden console and no rotor, just this mirror. But when you go into the interior, you see an all black surrounding area, which almost looks like a set in the non-set version, but in the set version it is a proper set, and you can even see the beginning of the hallway which would lead to the main control room. The controls on the console are hidden behind these little flaps, but you can use them when the flaps are up anyway. In this other version, when you go in, there's this little black hallway which is meant to be like the set area, then it goes into the main area, and this version is basically just like the 1976 one, but just a bit worse. You can't move around the flaps and things, and the buttons aren't labelled. There's also this really weird room hidden behind this wall here. The 1977 TARDIS is very similar to the 1975 one, but it has these yellow roundels and these pillars that would be seen in the 1980s TARDISes. There's also this door that can't be opened or anything, but I assume there's meant to be a hallway behind there, and there's probably never one seen in show, which is why there's not one in Gmod, which makes sense. The console and the rotor are very similar to the 1975 one, almost identical, but with a very few tweaks to it. Like the 1976 TARDIS, this has a snow skin, but it also has 2 lamp designs. The 1981 TARDIS is the 4th Doctor's last TARDIS, and the first one of the 80s, at least in Gmod. The 1981 TARDIS is the 4th Doctor's last TARDIS, it is the first of the 80s, at least inside of Gmod. Similarly to the 2nd Doctor's TARDIS, this one has a CO exterior and a miniature box, but also a Newbury exterior. This TARDIS came out a matter of weeks ago, and I'm very glad to have the opportunity to review it. In my opinion, this is just the 80s version of the 1973 TARDIS, with a large console area that leads into a hallway. The console itself is still very similar to the 70s consoles, with all these levers and bright buttons everywhere. However, the typical 80s exterior is very similar to these, especially the CO exterior. Although there's something I really like about this Newbury exterior, is that it has 3 stages of this opening. This is stage 1 where it's just closed, stage 2 where it opens, and then stage 3 where the phone is dangling down. As I mentioned earlier, I'm making this video to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the TARDIS add-on. I was going to review every Doctor's TARDIS in this video, but I didn't have time to, so I'm going to make a part 2 for the new Who TARDIS add-ons, and that video is going to be released on the 1-year anniversary of my first ever review video, and it may already be out when you're watching this. The 1983 TARDIS is what the 5th, 6th, and 7th Doctors all use. This TARDIS is iconic to every fan and casual viewers, so I'm very glad to see it integrated into Gmod brilliantly. It has 3 skins, the default, a snow skin, and I know where this is from, I just can't quite think of it, so tell me in the comments if you know, because it's really bugging me. The console of this is very 80s, with mini keyboards everywhere, screens, and lots of pop-up buttons. Almost every option available in the TARDIS add-on has a control on the actual console itself, so you'll rarely have to go into the TARDIS menu. There's a ceiling option which removes the ceiling and reveals lights from a set, and there's this door that leads into a hallway that has been seen many times throughout the show. On the left there's an empty room at the end, and on the right there's another empty room at the end. The scanner has a live image of the outside, similarly to the Ruth Doctor's TARDIS. Many of the previous TARDISes have this too, but I forgot to mention it. I really wanted to review the Warrior's TARDIS in this video, but I just won't have time to, and it isn't really a Doctor's TARDIS. In short, it's the Doctor's TARDIS from another universe. And I said earlier that the Twice Upon a Time TARDIS was one of the most realistic in Gmod. Well, to be honest, I think this is the most realistic TARDIS in the whole of Gmod. From the sound effects to the visuals, it's just perfect. And because it's so good, I'm gonna make a full review video on it at some point soon, so make sure you subscribe to not miss that. This is the 1990 TARDIS, which was obviously after the cancellation of Doctor Who in 1989. But the backstory behind this is that this set was actually built by the BBC before they cancelled it, so it is still technically a Doctor's TARDIS, and planets in Gmod, so how can I not review it? This has no setting options or even a double door version, so this is the default and the only version. The exterior has the colours of McGann's TARDIS but the dimensions of the 80s TARDISes. It still has the yellow roundels, but it has this new pillar design, and the room just feels so much more impressive because it's really high ceiling and the larger walls. This is also the first TARDIS to have the rotor going from the console directly to the ceiling, which every new Who TARDIS except 13s would eventually have. You open the scanner by interacting with it directly, instead of using a control on the console. Speaking of that, the controls aren't labelled, so there could be a million different features that I just don't know about. There's also this hallway, which is like really dingy and dark, and I think it looks really good. And don't mind that, that's just my map I'm on. And don't forget, underneath this hovering console, there's this Rassilon symbol that would be seen above the doors in the Paul McGann TARDIS. Speaking of which, these are the 1996 TARDIS and the McGann TARDIS, and are otherwise known as the TV movie TARDISes, and it's one of my most favourite interiors of all time. The interiors of both of these are basically the same, except this one has a few more details, so I'll focus on this one. And once again, there's no options in the settings or a classic door version, as this is double doors and will only be double doors. In my opinion, this changed the future of the TARDIS interior, as it was set up as a place to live, with a massive centre room that includes the console but isn't only the console, as for example this one has a library. The console itself is really cool. It's wooden like the secondary control room, but it has just as much buttons and levers as the 80s TARDISes did, without feeling gimmicky. One thing that is slightly annoying is the abundance of Rassilon symbols. They're literally everywhere, you can't miss them. Another thing you can't miss is the sky up here. I think this could have been done a bit better, but I still like the way it looks. And in the movie there was a screen coming off one of these pillars, but for some reason it's just hovering underneath the console here. But it's shown correctly in the McGann TARDIS, which is a bit unfortunate you can't interact with it. But something you can interact with is this piano over here, because when you do, it will start playing the Doctor Who theme, which is a really cool Easter egg. If you're watching this in the future, then the new Who TARDIS video is here, and if not, watch my full showcase of the new Chameleon Circuit feature. It's a brilliant update.